Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. This is the place where we bring you the headlines and the latest in black news, views, and opinions. I'm Romeo.
I'm Melissa.
I'm Demi.
Brooke is out today.
On today's show, we have special coverage of the Justice for George Floyd trial with civil rights attorney SueAnn Robinson.
Executive Director of George Floyd Memorial Foundation, Jakari W. Harris, is here.
Sorry, Romeo, I went in your line. Congressmember Karen Bass joins us to discuss the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act of 2020, and we have your headlines for today.
All right, we have all that and so much more. So if you're ready, it's our voice and our truth. Let's get it.
To me, this reeks of conflict of interest.
Do we know if he actually waved a gun? We only hear one side of the story.
This just really did make me feel good that the justice system did what they needed to.
We're going to keep following this story, and we will have the latest for you.
The video of George Floyd gasping for breath was essentially Exhibit A as the former Minneapolis police officer who pressed his knee on the black man's neck went on trial on Monday on charges of murder and manslaughter. Before the trial's opening statement, Reverend Al Sharpton had this to say.
Chauvin had George Floyd down. It had to be intentional. That's the case we make with that taking of the knee. The family goes in this court seeking justice for all of us in America.
Later, prosecutor Jerry Blackwell showed the jurors the footage at the earliest opportunity during opening statements after telling them that the number to remember was 9 minutes and 29 seconds, the amount of time Officer Derek Chauvin had Floyd pinned to the pavement last May, which was longer than previously said. The white officer didn't let up, even after a handcuffed Floyd said 27 times that he couldn't breathe and went limp, Blackwell said, in the case that has triggered worldwide protests, scattered violence, and national soul-searching over racial justice, according to the Associated Press.
Joining us now to discuss the first day of the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd is legal expert and civil rights attorney SueAnn Robinson. Welcome back to FOXSOUL's Black Report. SueAnn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. I hope you are keeping well.
Oh, we are. Thank you so much. So let's do a recap for our soulmates. How much time is Chauvin facing?
Well, depending on what charge he's found guilty of, he will face a different amount of time. It's 40 years is the maximum for the highest charge, and on the most smallest charge he has, it's about 10 years. So, by the time the jury goes through the facts of the case, makes their decision with respect to what they are going to find him guilty of, whether it's going to be second degree, third degree. Once they get to that point, the sentencing guidelines will come into play, and then we'll see how much time he'll actually get. But they haven't been instructed on that yet. Right now, they're just started the trial, had openings, and started witness statements today. And, they're going to be able to go home, but once they start deliberating, then they'll be sequestered.
Actually, that leads me right into my next question. SueAnn, thank you so much for joining us here again. So let's talk jury instructions. How important is it for a jury to be sequestered?
First, the jury instructions are going to be super important. That's what's going to tie the entire case together. That's going to be the jury's Bible when they go into the jury room and start deliberating. They're going to have to stay in the hotel. Likely they won't be able to watch certain programs or might not be able to watch TV at all, because during that deliberation process, they're really supposed to rely on the jury instructions and their recollection of the facts and the evidence. And so sequestration is super important. The jury instructions, kind of housekeeping stuff, yes, those are part of the jury instructions, but the actual jury instructions that they'll get before they start deliberations will include the explanation of reasonable doubt, the explanation of each of the charges individually, what the state and defense can introduce to prove certain things and what they can't. It'll really be their Bible in deliberation. So jury instructions are pretty important. The defense is going to try to get in a no causation, no case type of jury instruction, because their whole argument is that what the defendant did was not the cause of death, that other things caused his death. So they're going to try to get, I'm sure, a no causation, no case jury instruction.
SueAnn, I just wanted to thank you again for joining us, because obviously this is a case that is being watched by, globally probably, millions and millions of eyes. I want to move forward and talk about the opening statements. Jerry Blackwell, he made a point to discuss intent and what is considered a legal action for a police officer. He discusses force that Derek Chauvin applied with disregard to Floyd's life, and he specifically brings up the use of force policy stated by MPD employees, and they shall only use the amount of force that is objectively reasonable. The use of excess force against a citizen is considered to be assault. That, in addition to the rest of his opening statements, what were your thoughts on that?
My thoughts were the opening statement was well done. Starting with the video, which is the most compelling piece of evidence and really the centerpiece for Black Lives Matter movement throughout the summer. So the jury is very familiar with the video, but to not just play the video, it was the fact that the prosecutor was able to educate the jury right from the start. Hey, you know what? It's not 8 minutes and 45 seconds, what we've all been saying all this time. I'm going to give you a new piece of information right off the bat and let you know that it's actually 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And that's how you gain the jury's trust, the jury's ear, by giving them facts and information that they can kind of sift through and work with. And he did that very, very well. Using the video, is masterful, and it's the most powerful piece of information he has. And he really went and addressed the defense's biggest argument. Their argument is that other things caused George Floyd to die, other health problems. And he stated right there in opening, he addressed it by saying, well, all the things that the defense is going to tell you is wrong with George Floyd, it was always wrong with him. And he was living and functioning and breathing until he met up with the defendant, unfortunately. And I think that attacking your weakest point of your case, which in this case, the only weak point is the point that the defense is trying to make about George Floyd's health problems. Mm-hmm. So addressing that right away was masterful as well.
I have to agree with that for sure. Now let's talk about the thoughts about the defense attorney's opening statements. How do you think they brought it in, for today? How did they do it?
Right. I think, I would give him a B. It took him 16 minutes to say that his client's not guilty. And, as a former prosecutor and a defense attorney, I can tell you the first thing or one of the few first things I say as a defense attorney is that my client's not guilty, because that's the mindset that you want the jury in when they're listening to what you're saying. And so it took him 16 minutes to get to that point. So that's why if I was marking as a professor, he would get a B+. He did throw a little salt in the prosecution's game by saying that, they didn't like what their expert witnesses said in terms of the autopsy. And that's why they were kind of shopping around and getting other experts. And he did his best to really discuss those health problems, which is their whole case, that there's no causation, so there's no case. So, he has a theme and he's getting through it. He's doing what he has to do, but he has a very steep hill to climb, because that 9 minutes and 29 seconds is very compelling.
Okay, so if I can actually go back to jury selection for a moment. A lot of us, we've been talking about it on FOXSOUL's Black Report. How many Black people, how many white people, how many were women, how many were men, not really knowing if that's actually going to have a positive or negative effect on the outcome. So asking you, what are your thoughts on the makeup of the jurors?
Yeah, I think the jurors are extremely diverse. We're talking about 3 Black men, 1 Black woman, 2 people who identify as multiracial, 3 white men, 6 white women. So there's 15 jurors total. I think that the jury pool is more diverse than Hennepin itself, because my understanding is that they're only about 17% minority community. And so to have, so many diverse jurors on a panel, to me, really speaks to the job that Judge Cahill did in jury selection. So, allowing people that said they're familiar with Black Lives Matter, they even, have positive thoughts towards Black Lives Matter, they understand systemic racism exists. That question and that response typically would be viewed as something you could remove a juror for cause, but the judge in this case did not allow people's knowledge of systemic racism to disqualify them from being a juror, which was very important. And I think really led to this diverse jury.
We have so many questions for you, SueAnn, but just kind of staying in the, staying in the lane of discussing the jurors. One of the jurors is a nurse, and you have some interesting observations about her. I have my own, so I'm really interested to find out what you think will be the perspective that she has to offer once some of the evidence is introduced. I have a feeling that it is going to have to do with her medical background. So if you could just let us know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I truly believe, and my experience has always been, that a case is won or lost in jury selection. I don't want to call it early because no one can call it early, but I think a very, very unfortunate move on the part of the defense was allowing an actual nurse on the jury panel when their entire case relies on medical expert witnesses, because you're going to have an additional expert in the case that everyone on the jury panel is relying on more than the expert witnesses that you've introduced into the case. And I don't think it's something that they're going to do to try to violate their jury instructions or violate the law. I think it's natural. It's like, if you're in Survivor, you're going to ask the one that's a doctor for doctor stuff, and you're going to ask whoever's in accountant for accounting stuff. So for there to be a nurse, a medical expert right there, of course they're going to ask her. They're going to say, what do you think about it? And, she's gonna, give her opinion. And so I think that could be detrimental. If there's any issue with this medical testimony that is different from this nurse's experience as a nurse, it's going to be a problem for the defense.
At this point, I would assume I would want her as jury foreperson, because you're absolutely right. A lot of this case hinges on medical information, because the defense is basically arguing, like you said, that that George Floyd had these health issues and that his death was a foregone conclusion. But the craziest part is that the Hennepin medical examiner, the only person to have performed an autopsy on George Floyd, classified it as a homicide. So I'm literally sitting, waiting with bated breath to see how the defense is going to argue around that point, that major, massive point.
Well, with respect to how the ME is marked something homicide just means that the person kind of died at the hands of another human, but it's not necessarily going to be considered medical evidence. They only have like 4 categories on the ME form. It's like, was it a suicide, a homicide? So homicide is used by the ME in the broader term. But I think that narrative, as you're pointing out, is very, very important. It's very important to just maintain that narrative that he was killed at the hands of a human and not because of these underlying health conditions. So you're absolutely right. That's a very important point.
Thank you.
SueAnn Robinson joined us today. Of course, this trial is important to many people. Before I get to that question, one of our soulmates wanted to ask, when we have witnesses on stand, right, when they're there, is it important for them to control their emotions or to let it go? For example, Donald Williams, who's a trained mixed martials, right, and professional wrestler, he said the more his knee was on his neck, the more you see Floyd fade away, slowly fade away like a fish in a bag. Like, is it important that they really not get too emotional when they're on the stand?
Well, obviously the defense would, you mean when witnesses are speaking?
Yes.
No, I think the jury's expectation is that we're human and that they're watching humans. Obviously, the defense is trying to disinject and cause us to disengage and take that emotion out because they want you to make a decision based on, argument and not to consider emotion. But unfortunately, these are humans. And so the jury, I think, is going to expect people to testify appropriately. The 911 dispatch that testified today, I think she testified appropriately. She was very honest about the fact that while she was watching the video from dispatch and saw what was happening, she got concerned and went above and beyond to, quote, snitch, as she said, and call a sergeant and say, hey, something's going on that I'm watching on dispatch, and I think a sergeant should be there. So I think, the jury can relate to someone who is just being honest, not trying to turn themselves into a robot or a machine, and just giving them the truth.
Okay. Thank you for answering that. Now, why is this trial so important to Black Lives Matter movement?
I think this trial is so important is because it will answer the question. It will answer the question of Black Lives Matter, whether they matter and whether police are going to be held accountable when Black lives are lost.
SueAnn Robinson, we cannot thank you enough for joining us. As per usual, you are amazing, and we are looking forward to talking to you tomorrow.